Hey British Lit, this is our little summary for 14 and 15. I think those were the two chapters you had to read for Wednesday. And 15 is super important. So I'm hoping you guys caught this, but it's super hard to catch. And we're going to get to that because it's really important. So, all right, chapter 14 is called The Honest Tradesman. Sorry, snow. This is Friday that I'm filming this. Snow is falling off the roof like crazy, so... this chapter is The Honest Tradesman. We saw a chapter about the honest tradesman, or discussion about the honest tradesman, in part 1. And we kind of go back to the same characters. It is in London. And it talks about Mr. Cruncher. And Mr. Cruncher, it says, is sitting on a stool in a public place right outside of Tellson's Bank. That's his job. And he just kind of sits there. And... trying to read what that says. I underlined it and I can't read it. He sees that there's a funeral coming along in front of him while he's sitting there. Young Jerry is with him a lot, and you'll see him quite a bit in this chapter. All right, it says, funerals had at all times a remarkable attraction for Mr. Cruncher. He always pricked up his senses and became excited when a funeral passed Tellson's. And he wants to know who has died, and it is a funeral of one Roger Cly. And if you remember, let me go check on this real quick. I should have checked on this before I started the video. Let's see, where's that at? I believe he was mentioned earlier in the book. And I think I can go to the right page real quick. Maybe. Okay, I think I'm one page off. Okay. One of the people who was a witness against Charles Darnay. Sorry, I wanted to confirm that before I said it. One of the people who witnessed against Charles Darnay was Roger Cly. So Roger Cly, the witness against Charles Darnay, has died. It says Old Bailey spy. So yeah. So then they have some volunteers who go and help get the coffin out and like carry it. And Jerry Cruncher, for some reason, is one of those people. I don't know why he feels like he needs to be helping here because he works at the bank, but you know, he shows up. And then there's kind of like a mob. It says Jerry doesn't help in that part. He kind of, sorry, my brain is just kind of stopping. Okay, anyway, so he doesn't help with the mob part. It says he'd remained behind in the churchyard, though, to condole with the undertakers. He kind of talks to them. He just kind of hangs out. It's kind of weird. And yeah. And it talks about here, he goes home and his wife, he's like, I am assuming you've been praying against me. And he says, I shall make sure that you've been praying against me and I shall work you for it the same as if I seen you do it. And she's like, what? I didn't pray, you know, which is just kind of funny. It goes back to the flopping thing. And he says he has to go out tonight. Jerry does. And young Jerry asks if he can go. This is where it's pretty important. He says, I'm going fishing. Who goes fishing at night, by the way? And young Jerry says, are you going to bring any fish home? And he says, if you don't, you'll have short comments tomorrow. And he's like, okay, go to bed. So, he keeps an eye on Mrs. Cruncher, to make sure she's not praying, which is just kind of funny. Praying against him, he says. So young Jerry is pretending to be sleeping and he sees his father take a key, open a locked cupboard and brought forth a sack, a crowbar of convenient size, a rope and chain, and other fishing tackle of that nature. Young Jerry decides to follow his father, to see what's happening. And he shows up at the graveyard. Now this part is all it's kind of a weird part because you really have to pay attention to catch it. But he's not actually fishing because he's in a graveyard, because it says they fished with a spade at first. So yeah, they're not fishing. It just, the son is kind of saying it like, oh, they fished with this tool and then this tool. So it's not your typical, fishing. So. And then it says, young Jerry very well knew what it would be, but when he saw it and saw his honored parent about to wrench it open. So they use the spade and then they're going to wrench something open, which you can guess. They're in a graveyard. What are they pulling open? I'm not going to tell you. And he kind of runs away at that point. Could you imagine like being in a graveyard and seeing your dad involved in that? He gets scared and he runs home, which I don't blame him because I would have done the same thing. I probably wouldn't have followed him. But he knows when he sees his father that something had gone wrong. He doesn't know what, but something seems like it went wrong the night before. And then he gets upset with his wife. And he says, it's enough for you to be the wife of an honest tradesman, and not to occupy your female mind with calculations when he took to his trade or when he didn't. And it says the next morning there's a very different young Jerry, and he asks him, what's a resurrection man? And Mr. Cruncher says, how should I know? He says, well, I thought you knew everything. And it says, he's a tradesman. Well, what's his goods? His goods is a branch of scientific goods. Persons' bodies, ain't it, father? Asked the lively boy. I believe it's something of that sort, said Mr. Cruncher. I should so like to be a resurrection man when I'm quite grown up, is what young Jerry says. And he says, there's hopes with that boy will yet be a blessing to you and a recompense to you for his mother. So he's kind of asking what's a resurrection man. Back then, they would sometimes go and dig up. I'm just kind of explaining because they would sometimes go and dig up bodies and steal the goods from the bodies, but sometimes they would also go and steal the bodies and sell them. I know that sounds weird, but that was something that did happen. And so, Jerry is probably involved in something a little shady. All right, another person involved in something shady shows up in chapter 15. This chapter is in France. And it talks about the shop that the Defarges opened. There's a lot of drinking happening, and it's at 6 o'clock in the morning. It talks about that they sell a very thin wine at the best of times, but things are horrible right now. So they add water to the wine to like make it last longer. And it just kind of talks about, yeah, that's what they have to do to stay, to survive financially. It talks about the spies who looked in at the wine shop, from the king's palace to the criminal's jail. It says Madame Defarge herself picked out the pattern on her sleeve with her toothpick and saw and heard something. She just kind of seems to be watching a lot of things. Then all of a sudden, two dusty men passed through. One of them was her husband. The other was a mender of roads in a blue cap. And the mender of roads was called Jacques. Oh, interesting. And it says a second man got up and went out. Madame Defarge set wine before the mender of roads called Jacques. And then it says that she takes up her knitting again. And they talk about a garret, formerly the garret where a white-haired man sat on a low bench, stooping forward and very busy making shoes. So they're again talking about the doctor. And it's the same three men who had gone and viewed that doctor who are here. It says Jacques 1, Jacques 2, Jacques 3. This is the witness encountered by appointment by me, Jacques 4. He will tell you all. Speak Jacques 5. So you can see again that secret group who all have code names. Then they're talking about, remember the Marquis who died? They're talking about, it says, I saw him then, the mender of roads starts talking. A year ago, this running summer, underneath the carriage of the Marquis, hanging by the chain, behold the manner of it. So he saw a man underneath the carriage holding on to the chain, which is suspicious because remember, he dies right after that. And it says he is well hidden, but at last he is unluckily found. So they have found that man. It says that they hanged him. It says his arms are swelled because of being bound so tight. His wooden shoes are large and clumsy. He is lame because he is lame and consequently slow. They drove him with their guns. They haven't hanged him yet. They're walking him through town and they have him bound so tight. He would fall. They pick him up again. He's bleeding and covered in dust. It says, although condemned to death, he will not be executed. It says petition, or they're hoping he won't be. They have petitions that were presented in Paris showing he was made mad by the death of his child. So the Jacques who killed the Marquis is the father of the little boy that died, of the baby. So they present the petition. Of course, the king doesn't do anything with the petition. And so he's going to be executed. It says his right hand armed with a knife will be burned off before his face. This is his punishment, by the way. His right hand armed with a knife will be burnt off before his face, that into wounds which will be made into his arms, his breast, and his legs there will be poured boiling oil, melted lead, hot resin, wax, and sulfur. Finally, he will be torn limb from limb by 4 strong horses. They kind of tie him and then have the horses run in different directions. It says, the old man says all this was actually done to a prisoner who made an attempt on the life of the late King Louis XV. All right. And then it says that he has raised a gallows 40 feet high. They hang the man there, and he is poisoning the water. And water was the center of town, so this man is just kind of hanging there. He's an example. And yeah, he's just hanging there and decomposing and just, ruining the water. It says to be registered as doomed to destruction. It says the chateau and all the race, extermination. So they're talking about like getting rid of people. And it says that no embarrassment can arise from our manner of keeping the register, meaning keeping a list of everyone they want to get rid of once the revolution starts. So these Jacques guys are all part of the revolution, and that's a code name, so people don't know who they are. And it says, without a doubt, it is safe, for no one beyond ourselves can decipher it. So they have a way to make this list that people can't decipher it. It says, shall we always be able to decipher it? I ought to say, will she? They're talking about Madame Defarge. Now, think about it this way. What is the only thing you keep seeing her doing? Knitting. So it says she knitted in her own stitches and her own symbols. It will always be as plain to her as the sun. The knitted register of Madame Defarge. So she is literally knitting people's names in a code into, I don't know if it's like a blanket. They call it a shroud, which we'll get to in a minute. And they just she keeps this list with a code of, can you imagine that? Yeah. So you know how I said Madame Defarge sees nothing? She actually sees everything, and she's recording it all in her knitting. Yeah. Crazy. And let's see. It says Madame Defarge says she has a good deal of work to do. And it's like, what kind of things do you have to do? And she says, for instance, she has to make shrouds. Now, a shroud is something that they would use in death. They're like shrouds of death. And so the man hears her and this man comes in and he kind of moves farther away because she's creepy. And yeah, it's just kind of crazy, this woman. That's why, I don't know why I always pictured her as like an older woman who's just psycho. And you will get to see more from Madame Defarge as we go. Because yeah, she is crazy. And so yeah, those are chapters 14 and 15. Sorry, I had like a little mind moment there where I was like, what? Where am I? I don't even know. So yeah, I hope you guys are liking these chapters. I love this stuff. Especially the Madame Defarge, like knitting the Shroud of Death. It's pretty cool. And so, yeah, I hope you guys caught that. I know it's not super easy necessarily to catch that because it is pretty I know in past years I've had classes that didn't even catch, that. So, all right, I hope you guys have a great weekend. I will post 16 through 18 sometime on Monday. So, I'll see you guys later.